Hey, Simon, thanks for joining us today. As we're getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Hey, sure. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be on your podcast, Brian. I'm a long-term fan of both this podcast and also your own sales content as well on LinkedIn. I feel like I know your neighborhood like the back of my hand now, actually. So it's right on to be a guest today. So my name's Simon Gersler, originally from London, moved to Israel 17 years ago. Started out my career actually as a corporate tax accountant, believe it or not. But within a year, I moved into sales. I was actually working on a sales project for this accountancy firm. Really enjoyed it, got the buzz that I hadn't had from the accountancy. They said, thanks very much, back to your corporate tax returns. And I actually quit on the spot. I hadn't decided to until that day. And it was an on-the-spot decision that I couldn't do that. And I actually wanted to go into sales. So my first roles were pretty much face-to-face selling. I was a rep for a jewelry company until I was actually robbed at gunpoint in Paris. So I didn't think my life was worth for the amount of money I was making at the time. So I actually then started working for an American company in London who had a tailor-made suit company. We would go to busy executives in their office in London and measure them up in their suits, for suits, shirts, etc. In fact, Boris Johnson was one of my clients at the time, not one of my smartest clients, but he was certainly one of my clients for a couple of years. So that was an interesting experience. But for the past 20 years, I've been selling tech for early stage startups. So set up sales teams for companies in the recruitment tech and ed tech spaces. Both of them were acquired. And 2 years ago, after that second one was acquired, along with my business partner, Robert Curtis, who I met at my previous company, we set up Pike Global. And we're a sales and marketing agency. We advise tech companies on their go-to-market strategies. Rob produces the digital marketing content, and I am essentially what you might call an outsourced VP sales for clients. I love the variety. On a single day, I can be working with tech companies in cyber, medical, recruitment, 4D imaging, fashion. So there's a lot of variety, which I didn't really have early in my career when you were selling the same product in the same market. And I was in both of my previous jobs in those startups for many years. So it's good to have some variety in my day now.
Cool. And what do you typically see when you go in? Because early stage companies kind of see, why can't you just sell this once people find
Yeah.
out about it?
No, well, often I see a mess, which is why we've been brought in normally when it's almost I wouldn't say it's past the point of no recovery, but it's certainly things aren't working smoothly. So, and often you have founders who are product people who developed an amazing solution, but they're not quite ready for market. They haven't worked out who even their target buyer is. One of the first things we do is we map out the persona, work out whether those personas live, or they're on their LinkedIn, or what sort of groups are they in, what publications are they in, and to really start from the ground up. We normally tear it up and start again, actually.
Cool. And how long does that typically take?
We normally start for 3 months just to show like some impact. It's not something you can change overnight, and we'll listen to current calls, we'll look at the marketing material, we'll look at the post-demo material, see how their CRM set up for follow-up. So usually a minimum of 3 months. By the nature of what we do, sometimes we give them enough that they can fly by themselves, which is partly what they want us to do sometimes. But others we've been working with for 2 years, and it looks like we might be working them for a while to come because we're providing ongoing value.
Cool. And what do you like about sales?
I just love the buzz still. I mean, I've been doing it for 25 years now. I still get the same buzz that I did 25 years ago when I closed my very first deal. I like the sort of putting pieces of a jigsaw together really in sales. That's what we're doing every time. No two sales across any company I've ever worked for have been the same. You could almost write a book on every sales story, every deal that you close. They never follow the same route. So I love the challenge of what do I need to do for that client, for that sale? How do I address their challenges? Because they're very different to maybe some others in the market.
So you like the intellectual challenge?
I like the intellectual challenge. I think a lot of people that I've either come across or worked with have done what I've actually labeled myself horoscope selling. So what's horoscope selling? Horoscope selling is you open the paper and you look at Scorpio, and it says, hey, you might not be going out much at the moment. Well, it is COVID, so I'm probably not going to be going out that much. You're going to bump into a long lost friend, and it's very generic. And that type of selling is hoping something will resonate. You're chucking 3 or 4 things out at them. One of them might stick, the others might not. Whereas my approach is much more forensic and thorough, potentially a bit intellectual. I like to take on the role of a detective. So that's something I didn't do early on in my career, but I realized that is the best way to sell. You're a detective. uncovering their problem through asking smart questions, and then piecing together the solution.
And a lot of people don't do that, right?
Correct, because it's so tempting. And you look at all these generic PowerPoint demonstrations where they've mapped out 20 slides and you're telling me what my problem is before you know my name, and that's all you know about me. Yeah. So I think it's a very presumptive type of selling, which actually would put me off as a buyer. So putting yourself in their shoes, you don't want someone to have 20 slides, 17 about how great they are, and very little about addressing them. So I actually, pretty much all the way throughout my career, I ditched the slides. I didn't believe in it. I thought it put up a barrier from day one, and it was very much more like an open conversation like we're having now, listening, responding. And as soon as you have those slides, it's a different ballgame.
And I think that's because startups typically have that platitude or horoscope approach where it's like, just do more, do it with the CEO, don't do it with these minions. Instead of really that detective of like, who has this problem that I solve? How would they know if they had it?
Yep.
How can I develop some questions around the symptoms of that problem to get them to realize they have it?
Yeah, they don't always realize they have the problem. And sometimes the problem you think they have is actually a different problem. You can't make those generic assumptions. So it means that every sales call is different. It means it's more challenging because you can't rely on almost like a sales script. You've got to be thinking on your feet and responding as you're hearing their answers.
Now, your partner, is there a counterpart there as far as a balance, or are you both people have the same view of it, or?
There's actually quite a lot of synergy between us because he works more on the marketing side. So he comes from a business development marketing background. I'm more on the sales side. So I'll be on the sales advisory side. He'll be creating digital marketing content to back up what I'm doing. So podcasts, similar to what we're doing now, not the same quality as you're producing, obviously.
Of course not.
So it'll be podcasts, it'll be ebooks, blogs, content that will actually raise awareness in the market. So we sometimes start off on the sales side and then they bring in my partner Robert on the marketing side. And other times we start on the marketing side and they say, well, actually, we want to link it through to sales. So we don't have to go on both sides, but when we do that, it works very well because we really understand that full sales cycle.
And how can you tell if you've got a good client or somebody who's going to be more of a pain in the butt client?
So it's actually a very pertinent question today. I actually had someone I spoke to in the last 24 hours who, and I've flagged this up, I think is going to be a pain in the butt client just from all their questions to me and the level of expectation that they're like, well, how much are we going to increase our sales by in the first 3 months? And I'm like, we've had 2 conversations. I don't even know what your sales are. And I don't want to go into anything and overpromise. So, so you can tell when it's not always a good fit. Maybe some of the mistakes we made as a business in the beginning is people wanted to work with us and we just took on work that might not have really been a good fit. And we've learned very quickly that it's a short-term gain, but a long-term pain. So we've moved away from that model now.
Yeah. And what do you see wrong with sales today?
What I see wrong with sales, I think people are just selling in the same way. There's not a lot of emotional intelligence. And that's something which I really think that whenever we work with a company, I look for people who've got that emotional intelligence. There's a lot of robotic companies, when they get to a certain stage, think, right, we've got a few $1 million in revenue. We recruit a few robots to repeat that process and it's going to work. So I like to do different things. So recently, in the last year or so, we were struggling to get through to one of our buyers, and they're actually in the medical field. Impossible to get hold of them because our decision maker was a doctor, and they were never around by nature of what they're doing. They're not answering a phone. What I realized eventually was they all depended on faxes still. They're still getting faxes to send through documents. And actually, they're not getting many faxes apart from medical-related faxes. So we did a campaign where we blitzed 500 practices with faxes addressed to the doctor, FAO. It landed on all their desks because they just weren't used to getting them. And we were following up there, phoning to follow up on the faxes or getting some direct responses anyway. And it was actually probably the best campaign we've done since we started. Because you're shouting above the noise. I always talk about you don't want to be in the nightclub where everyone's shouting and screaming the same messages you can't even hear. You want to be the person that's in a clear channel where they can hear you, they can see your messaging. And it's not always easy to do. But that upsets me sometimes in sales, where the people take the lazy approach and just hope for the best, really.
Yeah, because I see it, it's even worse in marketing where
Yeah,
they're still doing, the 10-year-old HubSpot inbound, put an ebook up, grab a name, that's now a lead. No, that's
yeah,
somebody interested in the ebook. Not,
sure, sure. There's a long way from that to the sale.
and especially at startups, because that's kind of like what I did my whole sales career, is that you have a technical founder typically, they get a round of funding. You're probably coming in after that first round of salespeople failed, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or even before, even when they haven't actually closed any deals, there's some for a couple of the companies that actually enjoy this, I'm actually selling for them, and that really helps me, or keeps my skin in the game for a start. I can really understand what's happening, the challenges they're finding in selling, and eventually I can bring salespeople in. It wasn't a model I even thought of at the beginning. It was more sort of fell into it when a couple of clients requested it. But that's a really interesting way where we come in so early, or they haven't even closed the deal, and we need to close those first 5 to 10 deals to say this is the methodology we want to incorporate in your business language.
So it's kind of a two-sided sale. You've got to sell the product and you got to kind of sell the management team on how to sell the product.
That's right. Yes. So often in the very early stage companies, you'll get the CEO themselves who'll be selling the product, which actually makes sense in the beginning. They've got come with
Sure.
credibility. They promise something they're seen as delivering, not a salesperson that might not be there next week. But as you well know yourself, so unscalable. It's they're tied up with so many other things they can't follow up properly. It's a very, very short-term solution. So what we normally do as just part of understanding the product and the solution is go into our network. We're working mainly with companies in Israel and the startup scene. There's only a finite number of native English speakers that go around on the circuit. So we often place people we think would be a good fit for that product or service.
And what do you think makes a great salesperson today?
I think it's changed. The old days, people still think of that Wolf of Wall Street, that aggressive selling. I mean, that for me, that never worked anyway. I never sold in that way. I think good salespeople are storytellers. They need to be able to find a common theme with their clients. One of the things I realized, almost thinking on my feet, my first sales job, I had zero guidance. I was selling jewelry, a range of pearls. I was pretty much thrown a very, very heavy bag and said, right, try and close some deals. There was no training. I just knew roughly what each of these, which had diamonds and which didn't. And that was about it. And I realized very early on that the way you sell is to really work together. I always give the analogy of the chessboard. You've got people think that the person buying is an opponent and they're trying to outwit that opponent and respond to them. It's really, really not like that. The idea is to knock the chessboard away and sit on the same side of the desk as them and work out together how you're going to sell that solution and address their needs. And actually, one of the best pieces of feedback I ever had after closing a deal was someone wrote to me afterwards and said, like, really enjoy the process and thank you for your input. And actually, I always thought of you as one of my teammates rather than someone selling the product. And actually, I quite often use that analogy now. If you can almost put yourself in as a teammate, it changes the whole perspective of everything you do in the sales process. So again, not always widely used, but it is a coachable trait. That's something we can coach into salespeople. Once that they understand that mindset, they can take that on for themselves.
I think that is a key mindset because instead of sounding like a salesperson, you put all the focus on the client and what they care about.
Exactly.
And I characterize it as like a partners in crime type of
Yeah.
relationship, especially in the complex sale with that person is a recommender, not a final decision maker.
It's like, what can I do to make your life easier? You're going to come up with some challenges. What are those challenges? What materials do you need? What should I answer? Do you want me to bring that decision maker onto a call? How can I make your life easy? They don't want to go into a sale like with half-baked information anyway. And the easier you're making it for them by facilitating it, the easier it is actually to close the deal, I find.
Yeah. And do you think people are like applying too much technology to sales today? We're trying to replace selling with technology.
I think so. I think the old-fashioned relationships still win the day every time. Technology works to a certain extent, but Zoom there's still a barrier. There's always a barrier. And when things open up in Israel and we started to meet up with the tech companies in Tel Aviv, it was so much easier. It was almost like having 3 Zooms in one when you're sitting with someone for a coffee. And I think that old-time relationship, even COVID itself has taught people it's all about connecting, connections. People were losing those connections. And sales is all about connecting with your buyer, connecting with them on what they're needing, and connecting with them on an interpersonal basis as well. And I don't think it's going to be easy, and hopefully not, for technology to replace that human interaction.
No, and I think it almost hurts a lot because people who might have been marginally applicable are now kind of turned off because they're getting an email every day, a voicemail, a social touch, and people
Yeah,
just thinks it's more little things instead of a few big things.
it is. And I'll give you an analogy. I bought a product recently from the UK and it was shipped out to Israel. And this is about over communicating. And I took that lesson into sales with my clients. I'm not joking. I must have got 25 messages and pings about this particular product. We've got your order. The order's being processed. It's leaving the warehouse. It's going to be shipped. The driver's on his way. He stopped for, to get a pizza for lunch. He's actually on your road now. He's going to be knocking on your door in 10 minutes. It was literally that level of intrusion. And I look back at some of the cadences we were doing for clients, and they probably were too intrusive, too little gaps between them. And I tried to incorporate that into my sales process, because if I'm that annoyed as a buyer and I've already bought the product, what are my prospects who haven't bought the product thinking when we're over communicating?
Yeah. And what are some of the key things that you found? You must see a lot of things being done wrong because that's what creates the market for you.
Yeah.
Do they hire too junior salespeople? Do they try and outsource it? Do they hire somebody from a bigger company that they think they can just fix this? Or
I think so. I think there's a tendency, and it's in every location because we're working with clients globally, is to say you've sold cyber, so therefore you are the best salesperson for our products. Where, I mean, I've actually recruited lots and lots of people, particularly SDRs with zero sales background, but they had something about them. That maybe they were personal trainers, or they ran triathlons, or they'd played music to a very high level. They had that discipline and habit that indicated they could become successful in sales. I think the tendency is to be lazy and say, well, any Rolodex you do have these days is very limited anyway. We once brought someone into a company on the promise they had a Rolodex that would last for years, probably burnt through it in about 3 days. And surprise, surprise, it wasn't that effective. We would get on the call and they would introduce themselves and I would say, hey, we've got my colleague over here. And it would be quite awkward because the relationships were nowhere near as strong as they'd been made out. So I think look at the person, not the CV. I don't generally even look at CVs anymore. I want to see what else they've done in their career, see how active they are on LinkedIn, for example, what they're doing outside of their career as well. But the problem is that companies often make the wrong hires. They just think someone in the industry is the best fit.
and do you build up the team for them? Is that part of your role or?
We do. And just because we've sat in that chair already, we've seen the process, we know what's required. We do have a strong network anyway. And we do get very much involved in the recruitment process itself. I mean, eventually we often replace ourselves because we were there for like 6, 12 months and set up a repeatable process. And we like to leave them in good hands that it's not going to burn itself out because they haven't got the personnel to take it forward.
And what do you look for when you're recruiting?
I'm
Generically, not.
looking for, one of the key things I'm always looking for is desire. And that's something you cannot teach it. You've either got it or you haven't. It's impossible to train desire because it's such an inbred human characteristic. So it's such a difficult industry, sales. You've got to be so resilient. You've got to be able to bounce back. That you're looking for people that have got the ability to take a knockback, and we get much more knockbacks than successes in sales, and just brush it off and move on. So there's various ways you can see that in an interview or see that from their wider experience outside of work. And one of the things I've loved about the Olympics, actually, I've followed, there's been so many great stories in the Olympics, and this is talking about resilience and bounce back ability. The Italian Gianmarco Tamburi, who won the high jump last week, he shared the gold medal actually. He won the gold medal and he'd actually missed the Rio Olympics. He had to pull out a few weeks before with a shattered ankle, thought he might never jump again in the high jump. He won the gold medal and he ran straight over to the stand and picked up a cast, literally the cast where his ankle was, and he had written on it, Road to Tokyo 2020, but actually it was 2021 in the end. And he was like celebrating with the cast because that knockback was really his motivation to make sure he won gold this time. And obviously you don't get people necessarily with that's such a level of desire, but whenever you see that, then that's someone you want to be working with.
And what type of background is it? We talked about athletics. Is it military? Do you see it in academics? Do you see it in music you brought up?
I think anything that shows that you can repeat habits, follow a process. It doesn't necessarily matter if it's music, if it's sports, if it's dancing. It could be anything taken to a certain level. So I like to see someone staying with something over the long term. In terms of academics, it's a very interesting question because a lot of people ask me for their children now. People of my age now say, my children, should they go to college? Should they want to be in sales eventually or marketing? What do you think? And even though I went to university myself and did an economics degree, actually, which I don't necessarily use day to day, I don't actually think that the college background is as important as it's been perceived in the past. I'm looking for, I'll take someone with a desire over someone who went to Harvard. I really would. So academics could be important, but they're more important in banking and law and other verticals other than sales, I think.
And how do you test the EQ side of it?
I think it's just asking them questions in interviews, especially someone you haven't worked with already. I think you pick it up pretty quickly. I've always had what I think is relatively good ability to speak to someone for 10 and 15 minutes and see and assess if there's someone I think I can have on my team. In fact, I actually used to be a running joke in my last company because most of my first interviews literally were 10 to 15 minutes. And people say, well, how can you tell in 10 to 15 minutes? Well, actually, you can tell in 10 to 15 seconds often if someone isn't right. But you can tell very quickly if the person you're speaking to, the way they're responding, the way they're listening, actually, the way they're interacting with you is someone that could pick up a sales manual and follow a process.
Is it their curiosity?
It is. It's a lot of it is often about questions and going back to that detective, someone who hasn't come in with a list of 5 preconceived questions. The conversation, the interview's gone in a certain direction, and they're asking things there's no way they would have prepared before because we're now on a different tangent. So it very much is their questions and going back to fitting them in to those skill sets, which I believe will be important.
And what thing in your background gave you that curiosity?
I think it started from like intellectual curiosity. So I read a lot of books when I was younger. I was quite a bit of a bookworm. To this day, I don't read novels at all, which maybe I should do. I read books about the human condition, the brain, psychology. I'm very curious about how people work, almost what makes people tick. So I'm naturally a curious person myself. And it's amazing, actually, in terms of psychology and the brain, how little is known compared to every other sort of part of the anatomy. And it's so critical, not just in sales, but in life as well. It really is.
Especially in sales.
Especially in sales, but not exclusively. There's lessons to be learned for everything. But it's almost like you can read people a bit. Once I'm reading books myself, I understand what to look for, understand what makes people tick more than I probably did 10, 15, 20 years ago when I was maybe going with a weaker gut instinct than I've got today.
Because I see in the complex sale that part is the differentiator, that
It is.
curiosity. Yeah.
It is. And people want to think, people like talking about themselves. So if you go back to sales calls, any sales call where there's 28 minutes out of 30 minutes of you talking, something's going badly wrong. There's no way you can know anything about them. It goes back to that opening up discussion, to throwing away the PowerPoint, having an open frame discussion. And once that's done, then the curiosity naturally evolves. And if you are a curious person like myself, then you want to ask questions, and they're not always about the particular problem they're finding. They're sometimes wider conversations that take place.
Because you're trying to future pace it, like the chess analogy. It's thinking moves ahead. If I move here, what is most likely going to happen?
Yeah. Correct. There's a lot of that taking place, I think, in the sales game. There really is, and sometimes you do have to think 2 or 3 steps ahead. So you've got to a certain stage in the sales process. The smart, savvy salespeople I work with, and I sort of coin this phrase as well. They're pragmatic pessimists. They're always thinking what could go wrong. What there's been radio silence for 2 weeks from that dead cert deal he was about to sign it yesterday. you could say, well, maybe he's on holiday or he's been distracted or there's other things going on at work. Or you could have red alarm bells like ringing all around you saying, something's going wrong here. So thinking what is going wrong, what could go wrong, and being proactive, not waiting till it's gone beyond the point of no return.
That's it. I call it prevention because
That's right.
right, it's just the big deal. It's nothing but traps.
Yes.
And not
I think is that same.
yeah, not malicious traps, but just natural traps.
Yeah.
I'll call you back. I got to run it by my boss. I got to get some buy-in, and then the urgency goes down.
Yeah. Or just reconnect in a month. Well, I'm happy to reconnect in a month, but what's going to change? Why am I reconnecting in a month? What's going to change on the ground between now and then? Because all those reconnects in a month are can be linked to just a very gentle way to let you down, and then you play that game of chasing them for months on end, and then do you send a goodbye email or not? A lot of that can be avoided by that when you've got their attention at the time, spending the extra 2 or 3 minutes at the end of the call to understand why it's a month away.
Yeah. And at least get it on the calendar so that you don't have to chase 2 more weeks trying to get it on the calendar.
Exactly.
Cool. Hey, Simon, I enjoyed the conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, actually. That's the only social network I'm really on. So I'm at LinkedIn at Simon Gersler, Gerstler. There is only one Simon Gersler on LinkedIn, so it will be me. So happy to connect with any of your listeners on LinkedIn. Just happy to have conversations. I very much believe you learn something from everyone you speak to. So if anyone on your network wants to reach out to me, ask for any advice in sales, more than happy to have a conversation with them.